There cannot be a solution unless the big tech companies that effectively have the budgets. It's not a startup that's going to solve the issue. These big tech companies that have the budget need to allocate resources to make sure that their platforms are designed in a way that's safe.
Welcome back to another episode of Wise on Air, the show where we talk to the world's leading minds on the future of education. My name is Basim, the producer of the show. As the metaverse continues to evolve from fiction to reality, with platforms like Roblox, Fortnite, and Meta gaining popularity, should we be concerned about its implications, especially for our children? The metaverse has had a tumultuous development, to say the least. Last year, following its reveal, there was a lot of hype surrounding the potential of what this technology can be. But the conversation quickly died down with recent leaps in AI development taking center stage. Truth be told, I personally felt it was a fad, which is why we haven't covered it on the show yet. But with recent news of hyperrealistic podcasts now being filmed in the metaverse, we're starting to get a glimpse of what this technology could entail in the future. With the concept of the metaverse still being an ambiguous concept to many, it's important to go past the hype and consider the safety and privacy implications of what this technology brings. To help us dive into this topic, we have the perfect guest. Yalda Aukar wears many hats. She's a mother, entrepreneur, investor, and technologist. But most relevant to our conversation today is her work with Bracket Foundation on combating online child abuse through technology. In conversation with WISE director and host of this episode, Elias Fulful, Yalda shares some alarming statistics about the rise of online child exploitation and abuse. She discusses how predators are using these platforms like online gaming and the metaverse to target our children. And she also shares her perspective on whether big tech companies are doing enough to address these issues. And she'll talk about what actions different stakeholders, from parents to policymakers, can take to create a safer online environment for our kids. Without further ado, let's jump to Elias to kick off this important conversation.
Good morning, everyone. I am extremely happy today to host my friend, Yalda. I'm so happy that we're having this conversation, and I'm so happy about the beautiful work you're doing. And if we start off by saying, which hat you're the most excited about between the wife, the entrepreneur, the VC, the technologist, the mother, where, I know it's a hard one. I'm not asking for a ranking, but I'm saying, where do you feel a level of fulfillment in these roles? It could be all of them, by the way.
Yeah, it could be all of them. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I have to say I'm a big fan of the podcast. I love the content. I love the diversity of the speakers, the diversity of the opinions. I follow it and I look forward to it with enthusiasm and excitement. So really, thank you for having me on. Full disclosure, I have to say I'm definitely not a technologist. But thank you for the compliment. I'll take it. I'll say I'm someone who's really, curious to solve global challenges. I'm really passionate about inspiring the next generation. And as you pointed to, and I guess we're going to get into it as well, I'm, I would say, really passionate about making the internet safer for kids. So perhaps, obviously, many hats, as you said. I would definitely go with my true north and my inspiration, my guiding light is my kids, right? And ultimately, their safety, they're like the pinnacle that hovers over everything that I do. So yeah, I guess that's the short answer to a very
And I got the chance
question.
to meet them, and they're such a beautiful kids with a mix of the Lebanese and the Italian blood, and
absolutely.
Some of the posts when you show your kids eating pasta is like happiness in an image. Yalda, could you share a little bit more now about yourself, but more specifically, I'd love to understand how you pivoted from the world of finance to the world of investment and involvement with, because you invest mainly in technology. So that's where technologies came from, but the investment in this specific sector.
No, yeah, thank you for this question. And I never pass an opportunity to tell my story. And I could go on and on and on for, for hours. So you tell me how deep you want to go, how light you want to keep it.
I'll jump in whenever I want to jump in. So please tell us.
So proudly born in Beirut. Yeah. So I was born in the midst of the war. We left Lebanon at the tail end of the Lebanese Civil War, so late 80s. By the age of 12, I had gone to 7 different schools. Wow. So in true Lebanese style, really, I learned to adapt quickly to volatile environments, I'd have to say. So I was always interested in government affairs, public policy, politics, but eventually I took on a very big loan to study in the US and decided that the quickest way to pay off that loan was to go work in finance. And in true Lebanese style, out of all the investment banks I could have chosen, I chose Lehman Brothers in 2000. So clearly not the best time to be in investment banking, and an even worse time to be at Lehman. I was one of those bankers in Canary Wharf in London, leaving the office with the cardboard boxes, paparazzi taking pictures. I had my very short moment of fame there. Then was offered, a job at Morgan Stanley, which very, very conveniently was right next door. So I transitioned from 20 Bank Street to 25 Bank Street. The good thing is it didn't really affect my commute. And then I started covering the Gulf markets from there. So I went from being a trader to asset manager. And I remember my very first trip to Doha, which is where we are now, was in early 2010. There was, I don't know if you remember, there was this Icelandic ash cloud that kind of stopped all the flights. So I ended up being trapped here for longer than expected. Yeah. And I had obviously, met my husband, and he had moved to Doha. And I needed a reason for Morgan Stanley to send me more often to Qatar, so I could see my fiance. At the time, I was a junior analyst who couldn't really afford those flights. And again, in true Lebanese style, sold them on a business plan of amazing contacts that I actually didn't have. I convinced my way into their heart that I was definitely the banker that they needed to bet on to cover the market. Yeah. And I arrived here, again, ash cloud, I'm trapped, couldn't go to Dubai. I only knew one banker, one private banker at Credit Suisse. And I don't know how much you've interacted with private bankers, but never ask them about their book, right? They'll never give you an intro. They'll never give you a lead. Yeah. But what they will do is, tell you that you're wasting your time. So this banker told me, you're wasting your time. I'll do you a favor. You can have my driver. He'll drive you back to the hotel, and then you can, go your own way. And I had this eureka moment in the car where I took the driver's business card, and I saw he was working for one of those car agencies, called them up, told them, please send me a driver the next day. Funny enough, they sent me the same driver. And my instruction to him was, look, you're going to be with me this entire week, and you're going to drive me around to all of the places you take the Credit Suisse bankers to. So literally, I was a door-to-door salesperson for the rest of my stay. And this is pre-Google Maps, right? So I would be driving in the desert. Doha in 2010 was different to what, Doha post-World Cup is. And I used to arrive, there would be desert, then a big palace, then a gate. And the only comfort I had was that effectively there was a prior banker who had come here. So this must be a safe space. So I would knock at the door with my little briefcase, my little business card that thankfully had London on it and Morgan Stanley on it, and be very confidently saying, oh, I'm here to meet the sheikh. Because obviously, it's a palace. There must be someone important living there. So that's kind of how I started my career, covering the Gulf markets and building my book. And then InvestCorp, a mid-cap private equity firm in the Gulf, heard about me. And they're like, apparently there's this lady banker, banking and showing up uninvited at events.
She knows how to navigate the ecosystem here.
No, absolutely. And they made me an offer to head their office here in Doha. Terrific. And I have to say that was definitely one of the biggest breaks in my career. And at the time, so to go to your point about tech, so this is 2013. And this is the time when you had the big sovereign wealth funds in the region investing heavily in technology. So you might remember, the landmark, landmark deal when Saudi invested in Uber, and they were investing in Airbnb and Lyft, etc. But unless you were a sovereign, you're probably not seeing the deal flow at all, right? And if you were seeing it, it's probably a company that you wanted to sell, not
Yeah.
to buy, because
Yeah.
it meant the West Coast passed on it, the East Coast passed on it, Europe's passed
So
on
you-
it. All the signals pointing to sell. So I pitched InvestCorp at the time internally on a business plan to start covering, the VC world, and I told them it feels very much like a generational trade, and the population is young, they understand it, they use it. Why don't we give it a go? But at the time, they didn't really have the risk appetite for it, and I was 8 months pregnant with my first, and I told my husband, I think I'm going to quit InvestCorp. He's like, "What? Are you out of your mind? Like, you have the best possible gig,
Wow.
and you're just gonna give it up?" I'm like, "No, I have a hunch." He's like, "This is not a hunch. It's called hormones. You're 8 months pregnant. It's hormones. Let's sleep. Sleep it through, right? And post-pregnancy, we can decide." But I actually went ahead and quit my job 8 months pregnant.
Wow.
Foregoing maternity benefits, insurance, the
Wow.
amazing expat setup that I have, because I wanted to pursue this vision of creating a VC firm and giving access to an asset class that was not that accessible in this part of the world. And we launched our first fund in February 2017. It was a small $50 million fund, and then we grew Bracket Capital, to a big asset manager.
You
over
found your
one-
co-founder while you were having those hints?
No, my co-founder was a
when-
good friend, and he
Yeah.
has a fantastic story. Actually, he's definitely a guest for your...
We'll keep it. Yeah.
So my co-founder, Jahan Bose-Little, so he was one of my peers in the investment banking days.
Yeah.
So when I was at Morgan Stanley, he was at Goldman. When I was at InvestCorp, he was at Millennium. But what's super interesting about him is that at the peak of the financial crisis of 2008, he decided to resign from his job and become a hip-hop artist. And he wrote
You
a
guys
book.
are outliers.
Oh, no, he's definitely the outlier. And he wrote a book about it. And it was called The Trade. Effectively, how he traded, his suit and tie and, commute to the city
Yeah.
to a hip-hop, outfit in the underground scene of Soho. And then, he wrote a single. It went well, but then realized that perhaps it was actually much harder to be a hip hop artist and sign yourself to a label
So
than to
both
trade.
hustler, basically. Both co-founder are super hustler.
I guess we're hustlers.
The way you got to, it's almost a survival skills you have to, how much education the 7 years or the changes in 7 different schools and all that, how much you think that have prepared your character to become this person who don't take no as an answer and you go for what you believe you can get?
That's actually a great question. That's a very therapist-like question, by the
Yeah,
way.
I just want to bring it back to education.
Okay, let's dig deep into your childhood traumas.
No. It's really about education and character building. That's
Yeah,
where I
no.
want to get.
I think that moving around and having to adapt to different, situations and geographies and environments definitely helped me become very comfortable with volatile environments and the notion of risk, right? I feel that risky, volatile environments are actually my comfort zone. And that probably comes from the fact that I had to survive, as you say, in situations that weren't that straightforward, right? Especially as a child.
Yeah.
So yes, to my husband's point, right?
Yeah.
Like letting go of the perfect setup in what seems to be the perfect time, right?
Yeah.
You're only going uphill and you decide to, in a way, sabotage it. But that's because, maybe when it becomes too stable, it doesn't resonate anymore that deeply.
Yeah.
And then
it's almost, how much is intuition versus, is it like deep, gut calling to say, if I don't jump now, I'll miss the opportunity. And the worst is I can always come back to an amazing role with an amazing package.
Yeah, I guess it's maybe it's also a Middle Eastern thing, right? Like you probably experienced it as well. Your outlook on life is more that the glass is half full rather than glass empty. It's half empty. And as you said, like worst case scenario, what happens? Fine. Maybe you lose a year or two, but then you can go back up the corporate ladder.
Yeah.
And you made it happen once, you'll make it happen again.
Yeah.
But then the excitement that comes with building something that's effectively yours, and I always say Bracket and the foundation as well.
It's your 4th kids.
They're my 4th kids. Like I literally birthed bracket capital as I was birthing my first child.
Yeah.
And I birthed the foundation as I was birthing my second child, right?
Yeah.
We haven't done a third thing with it.
Tell us about now, you took the risk, you leave this package, you create the VC, your own vision with your co-founder, who is a hip-hop artist. But
the cooler one.
A cool one. And you create bracket capital with two big pillars, one in the States and one in the Middle East. And you start investing. And you raise your fund one, your fund two. They were good years. I think 2013, 2019 were...
2017 to 2021, I would say, were definitely the euphoric years of venture capital. And that definitely played to our advantage. We're in the right place at the right time. To your point, the greatest opportunities there was that we were backing founders with amazing ideas in groundbreaking industries, right? So that's what I feel was the most exciting part about that. And it did pave the way, to Bracket Foundation.
Yeah, and so Bracket Capital, you're investing, you're managing money. The relationship is very much, you need to look for great founders, great ideas. You invest, and if you've done a good job, you'll have a good return on investment after a few years.
So
but the foundation is a completely different. Explain to us,
I'll close the loop on bracket actually first. So we developed our niche in something called the secondaries market,
which is not an easy. I mean, is it easy for you but difficult for other people? Like,
let's say we were doing secondaries when secondaries were frowned upon, right? If you think about it, every single asset class outside of venture, the secondaries market is orders of magnitude larger than the primary markets. Think of commodities, of car sales, of real estate, of public equities, right, that you trade. No one participates in the issuance. Everyone's trading the stock afterwards, except in venture. In venture, you have billions of dollars of capital that are chasing, a few deals. And obviously, that's exacerbating the price. So our strategy was to provide liquidity solutions to early employees and founders who probably have the bulk of their wealth tied up in one name, the company that they founded or that they're working for if they're early employees, and to early stage funds that probably have 80 to 90% of the NAV of their portfolio linked to one or two names in their portfolio, but they can't materialize it until the IPO. So that kind of became our strategy, and it worked really well for us because my team's background comes from the hedge fund world.
Yeah.
So they took a very value-driven approach to growth investing.
Okay.
So that's the strategy that we did, which now became much more popular. It's funny how the landscape really changed between 2017 and 2023. Now many people want, there are so many fund managers who are specialized in secondaries. We were an early first mover in the space. It worked out, especially in this volatile environment, because you're creating a hedge within your portfolio by investing at multiples that aren't that inflated. I'm not going to badmouth anyone in the industry, but effectively, yes, that's what happened.
All right, so you have kids number one,
kid
number one.
Bracket Capital, and then Kid number two is linked to Bracket Capital, obviously. So Bracket Foundation is the philanthropic venture arm of Bracket Capital, and the inspiration and the story behind that, and that's also a very interesting story. So I was pregnant with my second, and I was on a road show here in the Middle East with one of our portfolio companies, which was an AI voice recognition system. No, excuse me, an AI image recognition software. So that's what they were doing. And we were on the roadshow, and I remember them saying that one of their clients was actually a child safety organization. And I found that quite, interesting. Why would image recognition software have a child safety organization as a client? And they explained to me for the very first time I heard the word CSAM, so child sexual abuse material.
Wow.
And again, as a mother and pregnant, that triggered me. I'm like, wow, so there's such a thing that exists, and it's at scale to the point that it requires a very sophisticated solution, which is artificial intelligence, to address
mitigate,
it. And I started doing research. I remember after that roadshow and the time I spent with that AI company, I spent literally 3 weeks obsessed. Like, I wanted to understand more about that space. And I realized that there was very little literature that existed on online child sexual exploitation and abuse. Again, this is 2019. It's funny how things change,
In 4 or 5
4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
In 2000, there was no real, a repertoire of, no one had really mapped how the magnitude of the problem. So I decided to start off as a corporate social responsibility project, right, at Bracket Capital's level, just mapping out how big, how tedious, how alarming that crime effectively had become. And we issued a white paper on how to leverage artificial intelligence to combat online child sexual
That was our
exploitation.
first collaboration.
That was our first collaboration.
At New York Concordia
in New
Summit.
York,
Yeah.
exactly. So we launched the white paper on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. And funny enough, 2019 was the 30th anniversary of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And obviously there's been much progress that has been made in the real world to safeguard our children, but online, they're still very much neglected.
Yeah.
So we wrote the white paper, and I have some figures maybe for our audience in terms of how alarming the issue is. I can read them out.
Yeah.
So in the last 2 decades, so the number of files containing child sexual abuse material has increased 1,000 folds.
Wow.
So that's
Across the world.
across the world.
Yeah.
So obviously,
The
technology
concentration,
is enabling that behavior, but it's such a huge number. 1 in 5 children is a victim of online grooming every day.
One in five.
Which means they're being sexually solicited online. 1 in 4 is a victim of sextortion, which means they're being blackmailed. 1 in 4 is under the age of 12. Severe live streaming of sexual abuses is increasingly targeting younger and younger children, with the bulk of live streaming happening with children that are under the age of 3, which effectively are infants. 95% of the world CSAM is hosted on European and North American servers, right? So the problem is being created in the West and is being consumed in the global South. That's kind of what we've been seeing in terms of trend. So we mapped out this, the problem, and kind of reverse engineered Bracket Foundation as a result, with the mission to leverage new technologies for social goods.
Yeah.
At the UN General Assembly, we ended up organizing a roundtable where we invited activists, former heads of states, but most importantly, big tech companies, right? Because they needed to be part of the conversation. And one of the biggest challenges that existed was around data, right? That you can't really build the solutions. You can't build the new tools required to combat these crimes if you don't have the data. And because of different data regulations, around GDPR and et cetera, it's difficult to have data sharing amongst different solution providers. So that's where the idea of the UN acting as an umbrella came about. So we partnered with the United Nations Interregional Center for Crime and Justice, UNICRI, to create what now became a platform called AI for Safer Children that allows law enforcement agencies worldwide to be empowered with tools to better protect, detect, and prosecute these crimes being committed against children.
Yeah.
And that was our first project, effectively. And as a result, there's been some progress that's been happening.
That is a beautiful achievement. I want to try to break down a little bit. You've shared a lot of very interesting and alarming information, and I just want to try to understand a few things to get us to where these crimes are happening, which is on the metaverse. But before that, so people know a lot about gaming. Right? Gaming is a massive industry, and within gaming, there's what we call the concept of the metaverse. But I still believe many people do not understand what's the metaverse. I mean, we could know the kind of the definition, but so what's the metaverse? I have my niece and nephews who spend hours and hours on, what's the platform name? It's a metaverse. Roblox. It's a metaverse, right?
Yeah, it's a metaverse.
So tell us what's the metaverse here, and let's just talk about the metaverse.
I'll give you just the simplest answer of what the metaverse is. So the metaverse is a virtual world where you're interacting an avatar form of yourself, most often, wearing virtual reality headsets, and doing much of the things you would do in the real world, but in the virtual world. So you're building relationships, you're conducting business, you're purchasing real estate, you're just hanging out, and this is happening in a virtual world.
They spend lots of hours on this virtual world. Do they have parallel life? Can we say that they have like a
Yeah,
normal
it's,
life with you and your
right.
husband, and then they go and create
Yeah.
their own avatar, and they have friends, God knows where they are coming from,
Absolutely.
and they're between what, 3 and 6,
And
7 years old now,
Well, kids between 3 and 18.
Yeah.
My kids,
Yeah.
they're smaller. Yes,
and they're gonna grow with this.
they're
So-
gonna grow with this. Yeah.
So the version
Life will
there-
become fluid, right? Like there's gonna be a lot of back and forth between your virtual life and your
And-
in the real world life.
On your personal experience, what are some of the experiences they go through, and how do you create that sense of how you sleep at night and say, okay, I think they're safe by using the devices today?
I don't.
You don't.
They're not safe.
They're not safe, regardless of
Yeah, no.
whatever
they're
tool
not
you
safe.
put, whatever
Regardless.
protection, whatever.
These platforms are very poorly designed.
All right. So
Yeah.
can you elaborate then on the specific repercussions of these platforms?
I can walk you through our research and
Yeah,
what we've
yeah.
done, right? So we published Bracket Foundation's first white paper, which was how to leverage artificial intelligence to combat online child sexual exploitation and abuse. And then we followed with a sequel, which looks at the nascent threats that exist, especially in relation to online child sexual exploitation and abuse on the metaverse and online social gaming platforms. So we hired a team of consultants and we went underground. Effectively, that's what we did. We went on these platforms.
A user.
As a user,
yeah.
exactly. We created a profile as a 10-year-old child and went on these platforms. On the gaming platform, there's literally zero barriers to entry. But effectively, the way that these games are designed is that anyone can create an account. Whether you're 10 or you're 40, you're having access to the same children game, right? There's no barriers to entry whatsoever. There's no email verification. There's no identity verification. All parental controls by default on these platforms are turned off. And to turn them on, you need to navigate, 10 menus with 13 categories and 40 subcategories.
Yeah, it's probably designed to make it
It's designed to
complicated.
make you fail.
Yeah.
It's designed to make you incredibly frustrated as a parent, make you feel super inadequate when it comes to protecting your children. That's how they're designed. So these big tech companies are putting the onus on you as a parent to make your children safe. They're designing the same platform for adults, for children, and again, very, very dangerous by design. So that's effectively what there is. Then fast forward to the VR platform. That was an even worse experience. So the moment you enter this VR metaverse and you have your headsets on, within minutes, you're abused as a child, right? And obviously, there's a wide spectrum of abuse, but someone coming up and pulling up the middle finger at you, right?
Yeah.
That's an abuse, or shouting profanities. And let's not underestimate one thing. If trauma is happening in the virtual world, it's not less severe than trauma happening
as much
in the
or
real
if not
world.
more,
It's
yeah.
the same
Yeah.
trauma
It
that's for
affects-
kids, right?
Yeah.
And that's what you're exposing them to. So then we interviewed a journalist, and she had gone undercover as a 12-year-old child on one of these,
Platforms.
children metaverse companies. And she went undercover as a 12-year-old girl. And within minutes of entering the platform, she's being groped, right? There are other avatars because there's no respect of your personal space in the metaverse, right? There's avatars coming at her and being like, oh, 12-year-old girls, that's just my thing,
Oh my
right?
God.
This is happening, and these are like these new forms of abuses, right? So grooming and sextortion, and these things are happening on these platforms that are not safe at all. And the metaverse and online social gaming platforms are the fastest growing industries of our generation. There's 3.2 billion gamers out there. 50% are under the age of 18. And gaming nowadays is very, very different to gaming when we were kids. So we're the
had a Game
Nintendo,
Boy,
Super
yeah.
Mario, at most Xbox.
Yeah, yeah.
I was even a Tetris generation. But when we would play games, a game had a beginning it had an end.
Yeah,
But it was
you
very...
you go through a journey
Yeah,
of competing and winning
There you
stages.
go.
And yeah,
It's
which is
beginning,
still
end.
healthy.
You start
yeah.
a game, you end a game. You're playing with your sister, your brother, your friends in the same room. Nowadays, games are social networks. So kids log in to the game to hang out. There's no beginning, there's no end. You're just hanging out and consuming as you go. You know, you log on, you interact with your friends, you create content, you watch a Travis Scott concert. All this is happening in the metaverse on these online social gaming platforms. And you do so expecting to be safe, but you're not, because effectively these platforms have become hunting ground for predators.
Wow.
They're designed to be hunting ground for, pedophiles at the end of the day. And these are some of the best funded, most funded
That's crazy.
platforms in the world. Online social gaming platform generated over $180 billion in revenues last
Wow.
year. The metaverse
So
is
we don't
expected...
care basically about the impact and the effect, since it has a very solid return on investment. The investors
Clearly.
don't even check the value behind it.
Many aren't, well, now more so because
Yeah.
there's more awareness. But in the way it was designed up till now, very little. The metaverse is expected to generate over $600 billion in revenues in the next few years. That's more than the GDP of the country, right? But obviously, it's, as you said, returns, growth.
So we consider these big tech
unhindered.
companies?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the big tech companies. This is happening at the level of the biggest, most well-funded companies in the world that allocate their resources for growth, unhindered growth, as opposed to allocating resources to safety, because effectively there's no repercussions to them having these dangerous platforms. They're
All
not
right.
being held accountable, and they're not being penalized, and they're just being incentivized to continue growing in this fashion that is detrimental effectively to our kids.
All right, so you're mentioning basically that the rise of big tech is an important contributor to this crisis.
Yeah.
Do you see these companies addressing the issues and the problems well? And maybe how much you're trying to contribute to make sure that these companies address the problems and don't ignore these things?
Yeah, big tech is definitely one of the biggest contributors of these crimes that is
And when we
happening.
say big tech here, are we talking always about those big names, or
Yeah,
or
we-
you're
no,
referring to
let's-
anyone who get to a level of unicorn?
we can do a quick scan, right? So Microsoft and Google have given you low cost peer-to-peer platforms where predators can, in a second share child sexual abuse material. Apple have given us broadcasting studios, that you hold in the pocket of your jacket, where you can live stream crimes, child abuse crimes being committed against children. Snapchat, YouTube allow predators to create these communities and go undetected, where they can share, best practices on how to sustain their crimes, and the list goes on. This is happening
And
at
it's
the
super
level
hard to just
of-
detect them.
So this is what's interesting. This is what's interesting. The legislation that continues to regulate the internet is legislation that dates back to the 90s, right? When the internet first came about. There's one particular law that in our world comes about quite often, called Section 230 of the Communication and Decency Act, that effectively says that big tech platforms, technology platforms generally, are not responsible for third-party content that exists on their platforms. So this leads companies to not want the liability that comes with addressing this problem. So what does Facebook Messenger do? Obviously, there's loads of... Now they're collaborating, and actually Facebook Messenger is one of the biggest ally of the law enforcement agency at this stage. But effectively,
Not only
their
as a
response...
lobbying exercise, they're genuinely...
I think they're genuine. But effectively, what happened is they encrypt Messenger further, right? But by encrypting Messenger further, you're making the job of law enforcement agencies effectively impossible to do. So yeah, there has been progress.
How do they do this? Can you get us a little bit? Do they use AI and like?
If you're fully encrypted, it's very difficult to find the data.
Yeah.
The data is
Yeah.
effectively lost. right? But now they're less, they're segregating child abuse material and other areas where they encrypt. But to your point, yes, there has been progress. And artificial intelligence, which is also a source of the problem, but definitely needs to be part of the solution, is one of the only way forward in terms of how you address these crimes. And we've seen, instances where, to the collaboration that we have with the United Nations Interregional Center for Crime and Justice, so we've paired tool providers with law enforcement agents to address specific crimes, right? And we've seen, for example, with the image recognition software that we've provided, that your time to detect and find victims has been reduced by, let's say, 50%. There are now tools that you can use on platforms that are natural language processing system that can indicate to you if a child is texting with a stranger and they're in distress. Right. Yeah, so there's like progress being made on that front. But the most important, there cannot be a solution unless the big tech companies that effectively have the budgets. It's not a startup that's going to solve the issue. These big tech companies that have the budget need to allocate resources to make sure that their platforms are designed in a way that's safe.
Yeah. I wanna deep dive a little bit more on AI because it's an important topic, and I just we wanna understand a little bit more using this tool. How is it used to mitigate the problem? If you have a little bit more details on how do you implement this in these platforms to just solve some of these issues.
I guess AI, you have artificial intelligence, you have machine learning, you have natural language processing. These are kind of the main areas of AI. So for image recognition, let's say.
Well, that's one of the examples.
One of the examples. So image recognition. If you're
to create a profile,
metaverse,
you want to make sure
just scan make sure that it's a child logging in, not a 40-year-old man that's pretending to be a child, right? And that's logging into these platforms. You can use voice recognition, make sure that this is the voice of a child and not the voice of machine learning. They become smarter as you give them more data. So obviously you're going to have issues initially when you roll these out, but then as you progress, it'll become more proficient.
Are we seeing the development of this problem as part and in parallel to the development of technology? Everything is new for everyone, so things are just fast. I'm asking this because I want to understand the policymakers you work with, and you mentioned the agent, the law enforcement agent. How much they're up to date with the technology, because we're empowering them to fix a problem, but how much
they're so far
behind.
They're so far behind. So technology has allowed predators and children to become more technologically savvy, and sadly, law enforcement agencies, but also parents and caregivers, are not able to keep up. Right? So
this goes beyond public policy and policing. This is a collective effort.
Yeah, it's also like private sector versus public sector, if you think about it, right? Like they just don't have the tools, they don't have the investments on the public side. That's why at the foundation level, we have 3 verticals. The first vertical is empowering law enforcement agencies with the right tools to better detect, prevent, and prosecute these crimes that are being against children. The second vertical is advocating within big tech for them to make their platforms safer by design, because again, the onus should not be on the user, should not be on the law enforcement agent. It should really start with the product that you're putting out to a user, right? If you're in the media business and you're broadcasting content that is harmful, or there are very clear legal and financial ramifications to the output that is your responsibility, effectively. But if you're big tech, there's zero liability. There's no accountability. You're not penalized legally. You're not penalized financially so far, right? You're protected by outdated laws that say that you don't have the liability because you're not the one putting that content, but you're developing the house and letting bad actors enter your house. So you do have
so then from your perspective, how society should react to this? I mean, we know we spoke a little bit about the private, the public, the government. How, generally speaking, now that these things are really harmful and they are growing in terms of influence and impact on the society, how the society should react to ensure that our children are a bit more protected online, since their life is going to be online.
No, absolutely. Well, first of all, as a parent, if you're not pleased with something, go to Twitter, right? Go to Twitter, to X. It's now called X. And hold your big tech providers accountable. So my kids are still small, right? So they're under the age of 6. And we have a no tablet policy that we try to implement to the best of our capability, right? But at some point, my child is going to need a phone, right? Because I'm going to need to communicate with them. And I'm going to have, this is where we are.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I want to be able to walk in to a service provider and be sold a phone that has all the parental controls turned on by default, as opposed to me having to figure it out. And having something that is safe, that I feel, makes my life easier and gives my mind at peace when I'm...
but they're not going to make money this way.
Well, that's where the pressure needs to go. So as a society, I think, we need to do different things. So you need to lobby for safer products. You need to lobby your governments to provide the resources needed to educate you on the monstrosities that exist out there and how unsafe these products are, and this huge world of online child sexual abuse, especially in our region. You say online child sexual abuse,
and it's a taboo.
It's like
you don't
super
touch that.
taboo. You don't want to hear about it.
We don't know the impact of this in 10-20 years. It's going to change potentially the society, how they grow, and
I think it's important to stop living in denial. So children are getting abused, children are getting groomed, and children are falling victim to new types of abuses like sextortion, where effectively they're being blackmailed to share pictures of themselves that are very often self-generated with strangers, and that gets them into a loop, right? So as a society, you need to start with that. And you need to understand that if it's trauma that's happening in the online world, it's no less severe than trauma that's happening in your real world. And you need to start having conversations with your children about these environments, right? When we were growing up, do you remember the first 2 rules that your parents used to tell you?
Many rules.
As a child in Montreal. 1, you don't speak to strangers. And 2, you never accept candy from strangers. Right? That's what our parents used to say. That's how we grew up. Rule number 1, rule number 2. Like you're walking to school, you do not talk to strangers, you do not take candy from strangers. Nowadays, kids are on these online platforms,
I love
constantly exposed and talking with strangers. You have no clue who your child is speaking to online. And 2, accepting candy from them, because in the form of, Roblox, which is the currency, and prizes and awards and unlocking this.
It has the same kinetic effect, like candy or little star.
And it creates, unhealthy codependency to strangers effectively on these platforms.
I see your beautiful passion about this. So what's coming next for Bracket?
For the Bracket Foundation? Well, we're still doing more of the same with advocacy, empowering law enforcement agencies, and also working a lot on the legislative front to make sure that legislation is being put out that prioritizes safety when it comes to products that are being sold and advertised to our children. And we're working on a user manual, this time targeted at parents and caregivers to empower them with the knowledge to take this on. So that's at the foundation level.
And 2 bonus questions.
Yes, I love bonus questions.
Thanks to our producer. He said, we need those bonus questions. Considering your involvement in technology, are there any apps or digital tools you can't live without today? And I know where you're going. Can I have a guess?
I don't think you'll have the guess.
All right, so tell me.
Okay, so I guess one tool that I really can't live without is my step tracker.
Yes. Oh, wow.
To make sure that I get my 10,000 steps a day in the real world.
But that's when you live in Qatar, because in London you do them without even counting, right?
Well, you need to make sure that we lead a very sedentary lifestyle.
10,000 a day.
I would say the only real one that I can't live without is my step tracker. So making sure that I get my 10,000 steps a day in the real world. So not online. That's where I'm disconnected from social media, disconnected from my emails. I'm in nature. I'm getting my steps.
Do you
done.
listen to music or podcasts when you do this?
Yeah, I listen to music, or actually I use that time to go for walks with people I'm having meetings with.
Oh, amazing!
I'm a huge
That's
fan
a
of
good creative way,
meetings.
actually.
I'm a huge fan of walking meetings, active meetings, or with a loved one, right?
Yeah.
Catching up with a friend or with your partner, and
in our busy lifestyle, I think it's so
absolutely.
cool to do this.
Yeah.
And one last question: if you pick any technological advancement, fictional or not, to be a reality within your lifetime, what would it be?
Okay, well, it's no secret that I'm a big Elon Musk fan,
Okay.
right? And he's developing, well, he's launched this company called Neuralink, where it will enable humans to upload and download their memories. And it's actually one of the best use cases for it is Alzheimer, which is one health issue that he's hoping to solve. But it's still quite early in the technological journey of that invention. So I'm hoping, as someone who's very, very forgetful, that it'll be made
You get
real
that.
and in my lifetime, so I can upload and download my memory and never have to forget anything.
I almost feel we're not far away from that.
Yeah.
I truly believe
And-
we can get there in maybe 10 years easily. I just hope that we can use these tools
Yeah, for good.
positively
as opposed to,
and not, this is not
Eyes of the machine.
each chapter of Black Mirror. Thank you
true.
so much, Yalda.
thank
This
you.
was
This
a
was fun.
profoundly beautiful conversation, and I think we have room to part 2 and 3 next time with other
Absolutely.
topics. And I do want to wish you beautiful, beautiful success in what you're doing with Bracket Foundation. I think you're doing work that is not only needed, but it's very important to raise awareness about this, because in this very fast life we have, and we're not paying attention to the effect and impact online is going to have on the next generation.
Yeah.
And I just hope that we can mitigate and find solution as much as possible, just to have a sane society and make sure that also we don't create a bigger gap between the developed and the developing nations. So thank you for the
Thank
work
you.
you're doing, and all the best with all the amazing also investment you're doing. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
and all the best with Wise on Air, and hats off to your production team. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
High
Thank
five.
you.